This is part 3 of Hebrew Zoom lesson, May 8th. Shalom, shalom. And I wrote down a few things here because it's very interesting to me. There's so much here, but this I found interesting, so I'm just going to throw this in here. If there's a guy has videos, I posted it once a while back. I haven't done it recently, so I might post it again. But he breaks apart the first word of Scripture. He's the Danish uncle. If you guys, some of you might remember him, but he posts these Hebrew videos. He's a total Gentile, but he does this wonderful thing. And he breaks apart the word into words, right? And he says, there you had all these messages of all these words in the first word of Scripture. So this middle word here, if you break apart Bereshit, is fire. And what this is here is bar, as in bar mitzvah. So that's another word for son, right? And then over here you have Yit, which is kind of ironic because Yit is a Yiddish word that means Jew, but it's also a Hebrew word. Yiddish is a sort of a dialect, a combination of Hebrew and German from the Ashkenazi Jews that lived in Germany. But it's made its way into Judaism so much that if you say a Yit, they'll be, oh, that's Yiddish for Jew. But what it actually means in the Hebrew is it's short for the word Yitom, which means orphan. And that's deep, right? Because what you have in Genesis, where was it? Genesis 15:17, when God comes to make a covenant with Abraham, and there's this really odd story where he takes and divides the animal parts, and it says a flaming torch, right? In the Hebrew, that flaming torch is the word lapid, is torch. And then it says lapid aish, a torch of fire. Literally, it's this word aish. So you have the aish going between when you're doing, and I should have said, see this, when you put these two together, these two parts, you get Brit, which some of you might recognize is the Hebrew word for covenant. So this is just interesting to me, but this is part of what that Dutch uncle does on his video. So you take the Brit, and in the middle of the Brit, in the middle of the covenant, is this word fire. So it sets you in mind in Hebrew, if you're familiar with it, of Genesis 15, where the fire goes in between when Abraham's doing the covenant with God. The flaming torch, the fire goes in between. And I just find it interesting. You've got the fire goes between the son and the orphan. And it's a different spirit or a different word than Nabal, which I've talked about, the orphan spirit. That's got a different pictographic meaning and nuance to it. Yatom has a different, and what this is very different, but Tav is a cross, the pictograph of a cross, and Yod is the hand. So it's the hand on the cross. So it's a very deep thing. We're not going to get into it anymore today, but I just wanted to show you that because I found that very cool. And
what's the second letter? It's Bet, and then what was the second one? And then Aleph.
So it's Bet and then Resh.
Resh.
And what I'm doing is I'm making it like the Bet is double sized in the actual Hebrew.
Okay.
History in the Hebrew. So that's why I'm making it double size. But if I just wrote it normally, it would just look the same size. You'd have Bet and Resh, which is the word bar, as in bar mitzvah. And the word bar means son. So it's just interesting that on the one side you have orphan, and the other side you have son. And this isn't orphan in a bad sense. Like when I talked about Nabal, that was the orphan spirit. That's the word fool in Hebrew. It's the one who tries to run his own life. An atheist, there's no father in the house. So Nabal is a very negative word for orphan. But this Yatom shows up in passages like where it says pure religion is to help the widow and the fatherless. So this is fatherless in the sense of somebody who needs help, who's been abandoned, who doesn't have a father, right? So it's not the same connotation as Nabal, but it's interesting that the fire,
It's
right?
more physical than spiritual.
Yes. And more maybe outside of their control. It's not a choice they made, but their situation in life, right? They're lost, but they're lost in a different way. They're not lost out of rebellion. So they need to be reconnected to God, but it's in a different nuance, right? Within Nabal, they need to be reconnected by repenting of their lack of faith and trust in God. They've taken over control of their own life, but with the Yatom, right, it's more of an ignorance thing. Anyway, so it's just interesting, right, that you can break the word apart that way. In Bereshit, one of the places where you see this show up, and this makes a connection for us, is Proverbs 4:7. I'm going to pull up my eSword for you. So I'm just going to shut this window for a minute because I can't have them both open at the same time. And Proverbs 4:7. I'm making it bigger for you. See, it says here in English, this is King James, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all that getting, get in understanding. That's Proverbs 4:7. Now, I'm going to show you in the Hebrew because it'll be much more instructive in the Hebrew. I've got 7 windows open here on my computer. All right, so here's the beginning of wisdom is, right? Hokmah is what it says in the Hebrew. So wisdom is the word Hokmah. So here you have Reshit. You see this first word I'm going to highlight here? Can you see that on your screen? I'll make it a little bigger, see if that makes it easier. So Rishon. Now if I put a letter bet on the front of that, that's the same exact word that you get in Genesis 1:1. That's that first word of scripture. See that? So you get if I put a bet on front of that, you get Bereshit, right? Re sheet is actually what it is. I said Rishon, but it's actually, if I sound that out in the Hebrew, it's Reshit. So it's literally the same exact word without the prefix of in the, right? So this is the word again, and this is one of the ways to study scriptures. You take the same Hebrew word that's in Genesis 1:1, and you look at where else that same Hebrew word occurs in scripture. And here you have the beginning. Let me just show the English here. The beginning of wisdom is, if you remember in the Hebrew, a lot of times when you have 2 nouns together, you can insert the word of in between. It's called the construct. So you get the beginning or a beginning of wisdom. Get wisdom, kene. That's this word here, kene, and it says in the scripture that in Genesis it says, Eve said that I have obtained a child from the Lord. Well, his name means to obtain, to get something, to obtain something. So that's why he was named Cain. It's the same Hebrew word. So here it shows up in its context as get, obtain, right? Obtain hokmah, and with, right, is vaal would be and with. And then this is the word Cain conjugated with all you're getting, right? Kineyacha, right? Kina, with all you're getting, get bina. And this word here is, remember, Kokma was the first spirit of God, that's wisdom, and bina is the second one, is understanding, is how they're translating it, right? That's the second spirit of God. So you get, in the beginning is Hokmah, right? Get Hokmah, and with all you're getting, get Bina. So it's a little bit deep. Like I said, it's more intermediate level, but here you're getting another confirmation in a different verse that's connecting you with the very first one is Hokmah. You see, the Rishon is Chokmah. So that's another, like double checking your math, right? The numbers add up. So what that's telling us is when you connect the two Rishons from Genesis 1:1 and Proverbs 4:7, and you make the connection in the Hebrew, right, of this word, Bereshit, which is Reshit in Proverbs 4:7. So what you get in Proverbs 4:7 is you get the same word without the bet. So that's what you're getting, and it's the same as in Genesis 1:1, the same exact word, and even conjugated, it sounds exactly the same. So in the beginning is, right, Hokmah. So that's an example of where that shows up. I'll show you one more here to go with that. So here you have again, and in this case, the King James is doing us a favor because they're translating it correctly as "and the beginning." And the beginning is Reshit again. So the same word as in Genesis 10:10, but in this case, it's talking about Nimrod. And Nimrod, by the way, his name means rebellion. Nimrod was the ancestor of Ham. Remember when Noah was on the ark and he had his sons? And remember Ham and Canaan, and they were cursed by Noah. And this is that family branch. Well, you go down through that family tree and you get Nimrod, and he's the one that built the Tower of Babel that brought judgment. So this family's troublemakers in the Bible. And I don't think that stopped. But this word Babel means confusion in Hebrew, and it's where we get the word Babylonian or Babylon from, right? So like I said, it's all connected. So you get Nimrod building the Tower of Babel, and this is the beginning of his kingdom. So what kingdom is it the beginning of? Reshit, right? This is the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom, which represents this whole family line of Babel. It's obviously the enemy, the devil, right? This is Babylon. This is the beginning of Babylon and the whole Babylonian kingdom that shows up again in Revelation at the end. So we're seeing here the beginning to the end. You get the beginning of the devil's kingdom was Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. And it reached a point which we're not going to get in depth about, but it reached a point where God had to intervene, right? God said, let us go down and confound their languages, right, at the Tower of Babel. And that's where the languages were split, was because of the Babylonian kingdom that Nimrod had set up that was in opposition to God, which I've talked about before. You get that mirrored in church history. You get the Septuagint, the Greek translation, and as you follow the kingdoms in Daniel where they had the dream of the statue, you remember, and you had Babylon was at the top, right? Babylon, and they're all one and the same, but these are different expressions of the devil's kingdom, of the Antichrist kingdom, from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation. So first you got Babylon, then you got Persia, or the Medo-Persian Empire, right? That was the second kingdom. And then you got the Greeks, and then you got the Romans. And this is why, without a Hebrew background, people who don't have a grounding, they dismiss things as petty, irrelevant details. But if you follow the scripture from cover to cover, God says right here in Genesis 10, boom, Babylon, right there, that's the beginning of the Antichrist kingdom, Tower of Babel. This all goes back to the Tower of Babel. And what happened at the Tower of Babel? What was the judgment? Was taking the one pure language
and confusing it.
and confusing it into, the rabbis say, 70 languages. And out of those 70 now, it's branched off into many more. But 70 basic foundational languages where we get all the languages of today out of from the Tower of Babel. And then you have under the Greeks, you get the Septuagint, which was 2nd century BC, which the rabbis interpret in the month of Tevet as a chastisement upon Israel. So Israel had allowed Babylon, Persia, the Greeks, it allowed the Antichrist kingdom, and God gave them Greek. He judged the language. because if you follow it, and I've mentioned this before, it says Abram the Hebrew, and in the Hebrew Bible, the word Eber means Hebrew, and it's in the lineage between Shem and Abraham. I talked about this before, but if you start with Noah's son Shem and you follow the genealogy there in Genesis, Eber is the 4th generation, and Abram is the 10th generation in that segment of the. So you had Noah was the 10th generation, and you had the flood, and then you start again with Shem, and you get another cycle of 10, and Abram becomes the 10th, which Abram is the remnant, which, by the way, an interesting thing about the word remnant. This is the end of part 3, May 8th, Hebrew Zoom lesson. Shalom, shalom.